3 sunrises, 3 sunsets, 3 days, Megan.
You're listening to That's Pretty Dark,
the podcast where we talk about all of the entertainment that scared us as children
and still haunts us as adults. So grab your flashlight and join us as we take a frightfully nostalgic look over our shoulders
and under our beds
and in our closets.
And together we'll realize, whoa, that's pretty dark.
Pretty dark. So I'm painting my bathroom ceiling, right? I'm finally to like some of the final touches. I'm getting the ceiling done. I'm going to paint the trim, put the floors in. I was outside the other day washing my paintbrushes and going up and down the back steps to my kitchen door. And I almost fell off the damn steps.
I'm just picturing you doing like a twirl.
Kind of.
And you have paintbrushes in your hand.
Kind of, yeah, because I was like spinning around, not paying attention. And you know what it was? I went to step back with my foot, not looking, and stepped on very precariously like a plant pot, a clay pot.
A planter.
Yeah, okay, a planter. And almost cracked my head open in the
I'm
back.
not laughing
in the
at
backyard.
you. I'm laughing with you.
Too old to be falling down here in the backyard.
You're too young to be falling down.
I'm too young to be falling down. You're right. You're right. I'm too young and I'm too old for both of those things at the same
You're in the sweet spot where there should be no falling down stairs.
Yeah, that's where we are. That's where we live on That's Pretty Dark podcast. My name's Christian.
My name is Kaylin.
I'm the youngest old timer around.
I feel like a lot of people relate to that. We feel too young to be having certain problems that we're having and too old to be having certain problems that we're having. And that's kind of just the millennial way, is it not?
Kind of. I'm like my own Goldilocks, you know?
Yes.
Not too old.
Sorry.
Not too young.
Well, I was in the midst of like singing an Aaron Carter song in my head. And then I got sad about that.
Right.
I'm not too young and I'm not too old. You know?
I don't know. I only know his Candy song.
I Want Candy. And even that's a cover.
I know.
Call yourself an Aaron Carter fan.
I'm not.
You don't.
I'm not an Aaron Carter fan. I have never claimed that.
I knew you were going to get
will.
defensive. I'm just joking.
Where'd this come from? We're not talking about Aaron Carter today.
No, we are talking about Oliver and Company.
That's right. Part 2.
Part 2.
Yeah, because we already did part 1, so no point in doing that again.
Definitely not. I sure don't want to. But hopefully, listener, you will recall that last time we talked about Dickens' social commentary and the way Disney brought this commentary to a whole new generation, as well as the surprisingly eventful production story and the star-studded cast surrounding Oliver and Company. And I remind you of this because we've gotten some recent reviews, okay? How somebody was disappointed that we don't talk about the production details of things.
Really?
And I just have to, I mean, hey, have your opinions on us. You don't have to like us. That is okay.
No, we should go through all of our negative
you don't have to enjoy it.
Reviews, read them on the air, tell them we're going to find them, we're going to change their minds.
No. The thing that irks me about it is that they said that we don't talk about production details.
Yeah, it's true.
Tell me that you've only listened to one episode without telling me. And that's fine. You don't have to keep listening. I just hate that that was the impression that they got because they listened to an episode that didn't contain the production details.
Oh,
so I'm just saying.
I know what episode
if you want to hear the production details about Oliver and Company, they are right there waiting for you in part 1.
They're all in part 1. All of them. Every single detail. Every deet.
And every tale.
We're not going to please everybody. And if we can't please you, then by all means, go please yourself. Amen.
Whatever
gets the job done. You know what I'm saying?
Sometimes that's all you can do.
Yeah, well.
Today, I really want to get into the grittier aspects of the plot of the film and appreciate not only the beautiful melancholic tone, but the way that they didn't soften or simplify the source material for children's sake, instead forcing us to confront some harsh realities of which Dickens' contemporaries would have been well aware.
Can I confess something?
Go ahead.
I'm feeling a little bit sensitive, a little bit vulnerable this evening because I told myself between part 1 and part 2, I told myself I would read Oliver Twist again.
Oh my God. I mean, that's a commitment.
It would have. I mean, I could have done it. I just didn't.
Well, that's okay.
We'll see how much I actually remember.
So the first section I titled Street Savoir Faire.
That's street smarts.
I titled it that in part for all of you out there who have never known what Dodger was saying in Why Should I Worry? had so many conversations in high school where people are like, what are the lyrics? I don't know what the words are. And I was like, street savoir-faire. And they were like,
Well, you would know that.
What?
Those would have been the days before you could just turn on the closed captioning and read everything. But you are one of those people that if you hear a song, you know just about every word they're saying.
Yeah.
Most of my favorite songs from my favorite bands, I don't know what all the lyrics are.
You've told me that, and it shocks me.
I'm making words up.
I have always been a lyrics person my whole life.
Yeah.
And I don't know why. I mean, that's how I absorb
You
it.
have the music, lyric, savoir-faire.
And I want to address in this section some of the more mature elements of the film. But first, the actual French translates to know how to do.
Mm-hmm.
And the phrase has come to mean the ability to speak or act appropriately in social situations. That's if you ask the Oxford Dictionary.
Sure.
Other definitions include the capacity for appropriate action, especially a polished sureness in social behavior.
Polished sureness?
Polished sureness.
Oh, like you're sure.
You are sure. Sureness.
Sureness.
Correct.
Got it.
I personally loved characters with the savoir-faire when I was younger, like Dodger and Rita and Georgette and Charlie.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And as I've grown and kind of unraveled some of the core elements of my personality, I think that this was in part because of my then undiagnosed neurodivergence. Because it was always so appealing to me when a character could be super self-assured and it wasn't something that I had, but I always wanted to emulate that.
A polished sureness.
A polished sureness. You can say it so much better than me. It's tripping me up. But I believed Dodger when he said it. Once you got the beat, you can do anything.
He's not wrong.
The ease with which he approached everything, like the TV static in his shades, he's just too cool. And I just wished that I could be that way. Like, cool it, Dodger fans.
I think everybody kind of wants that, but very few people really can embody that and emulate that, like you're saying.
Totally.
You know who he reminds me of in all of his like super confident New York street smarts kind of guy kind of vibe? He reminds me of Lenny Bruce.
Oh, yeah.
Or at least the Lenny Bruce that's in Marvelous Miss Maisel. I don't
the
know
way
if he was really like that in real life, but the actor's voice and everything, like he talks like that.
It reminds me of Midge Maisel. I love Midge Maisel because she has the savoir-faire. Like, she just knows what's going on.
That's
and
true.
not only that, but like she doesn't care. I think that's really the key, honestly, is that she doesn't care if people get it or not. She's always having her own.
Yeah, she's more about like doing her own thing and doesn't care.
Yeah,
But, like even the things that she doesn't understand, he's always there to explain it to her.
that's true.
So he's kind of her Dodger
Yeah,
in a way.
that's true.
Man, those two kids,
I love
why
them.
can't they make it work?
Why can't the kids make it work? I love them so much. I always wanted to be able to like fall into the rhythm of the situation and be able to navigate whatever I'm thrown into. And I feel like sometimes I'm able to do that and others it's just like a no-go.
Right.
I do think there's a lot to be said for the street smarts of Dodger and the whole gang and the resourcefulness that we find ourselves discussing so often about the latchkey generation.
For sure.
And speaking of latchkey kids, while we've often seen this depicted in lower income families, it's also a trope of the time for like rich parents to abandon their kids as well.
Oh, yeah, that's true. They're never there. It's just for different reasons.
Exactly. It's just for different reasons. Some is more by choice and
Right.
some is more by necessity.
If it's like lower income families, like we see with Are You Afraid of the Dark or something.
Mom's at work. You know, either you have to be away earning the money or you have to be away, apparently have to be away spending the money. You know?
Right.
At least that's how it was in 80s and 90s media.
This one and like We're Back.
Yes. We've got We're Back.
The little
Cecilia.
girl's parents are just missing.
It happens on Dawson's Creek. Paris from Gilmore Girls.
Yeah.
We mentioned Gilmore Girls last time.
Yeah.
But this was super common in media. Just parents of all life stations were absent.
And it usually is played like they just couldn't care less and they're off living their own life.
At least kids today have social media to fall back on. I feel like they have some kind of support.
Right.
But I do think that it was more like, I feel like kids in the 90s kind of felt the absence more.
You say that and then I think of The Cable Guy with Jim Carrey. Did you ever see that?
No.
He was raised by the TV. He becomes a cable guy.
Yeah, okay.
But he's psychotic.
Yeah, I want to watch that.
He needs lots of therapy. It's really, really good.
I can't believe you've never made me watch it before.
It's a dark comedy. We can watch it tonight if you want
Hey.
when we finish recording.
We've also got to take a moment while we're discussing maturity to talk about the relationship that forms between Tito and Georgette.
Oh, man.
Hey, there's no time for long goodbyes, but here's something to remember me by, baby.
Yowza.
I said it last time, I love Tito so much. I feel like he's one of Disney's most quotable characters. And that's in spite of the very troubling Mexican stereotypes.
Good at hot wiring cars.
Hot wiring cars, yeah. It's pretty rough. It's pretty bad. But I've always loved Tito. And he gets, to quote, one of Disney's more famous or earliest songs, which is Hi Ho, Hi Ho. It's off to work I go.
Yeah.
When you're Disney, you can reference Disney. It's great.
Actually, I didn't notice that my first time watching it.
He's totally love-struck from his first interaction with Georgette, and she can't be bothered with him. And we see this progress in that enemies to lovers kind of way. Mm-hmm. We see Tito get slapped, and he comes back like, oh, I think she likes me, man. Like,
I think she likes me, man.
Yeah, she like bullies him.
She bullies him. She belittles him. She talks down to him. She treats him like crap. And he's like, okay, yeah, she's into me. I like this. Like, he's totally cool with it. And this dynamic was somehow very familiar to me and very sitcom.
I mean, it is funny.
And I get the appeal of the whole enemies to lovers thing, but like also consent is cool.
Of course.
And no means no.
Absolutely.
And he probably deserved to be slapped, in all honesty.
A few times, yeah.
But then after this progresses, there's this hint of misogyny at the end when he says, like, get off my back, woman, I'm driving. And then he runs from her when she tries to fix him up.
I can't get this woman off me. Oh, man, I gotta get away from that chick.
Alonzo!
Goodbye, Oliver.
Right, as soon as she's interested.
Yeah. Could I see you for a moment privately?
Mm-hmm. Man, the sexual undertones are wild.
So suggestive.
So suggestive. Well, they always throw that in there. As soon as we meet Dodger, he's blowing kisses to the female dog on the street.
Mm-hmm. To ladies.
But there is always that element in these old, cartoons.
Of the guy trying to holler at the girl.
Yeah, catcalling and
it's
stuff.
All over the place, everywhere. Yep.
Instantly sexualizing these animals.
For me as a kid, a tomboy with a very healthy sense of internalized misogyny, I thought it was funny at the time because, of course, it would backfire on him because he doesn't actually want to spend his life with her because who would? Gross. She's all girly and pink. Mm-hmm. But Georgette was objectified from start to finish until she gave in to his advances. And that's when the tables turned for Tito. And it was immediately not okay when she did the same thing in reverse.
Right.
We've all done that thing where we bit off more than we can chew and maybe we change our mind. And that's why they say, be careful what you wish for. But this was clearly more than that. And we saw so much of this in popular media. And it was completely normalized for me as a young woman. And I understood that I needed to appeal to the male gaze without having actual feminine opinions or interests because that was the turnoff.
That is interesting.
It's everywhere. It's not, it's not just this, but this is a really solid example.
Do you think that's why you're already kind of a tomboy anyway?
Yeah.
That's kind of the definition of the tomboy.
I kind of was a tomboy for most of my life, but I was exposed to this so young that I don't know if this is the reason, but I definitely absorbed it's unattractive to wear pink and do these things and want to dress up and whatever else.
Right.
But it's attractive to look good, but not try to and have interest in what the guys have interest in,
That is weird.
So I don't know how much of it, I looking back, I just have no idea what was me. I still have a lot of interest that would be considered masculine maybe at the time. I was into, HTML coding and engineering camp and stuff.
I don't know. I'm just thinking about through the 80s and 90s going from kind of grunge through the punk era. I feel like that sort of leveled the playing field where guys became a little bit more effeminate and girls became a little bit more masculine.
Well, it took a long time for that culture to penetrate the evangelical culture.
Oh, I don't think it has yet.
That we were involved in.
Well, I guess that's not true. Cool Church is kind of punky now.
I don't know. I know that this message here to me as a 5-year-old was it's unattractive to be girly.
Right.
It's just not true. There are all different types of attraction and there are all different types of gender expression. And honestly, things like that don't really have anything to do with your gender. I was just taught that they did.
Of course, yeah.
From my entire environment growing up. So
I think we all were.
There's a book, I think it's on the banned books list. It's an elementary kids book called Pink is for Boys. Mm-hmm. And you go through the whole thing and it's Pink is for boys and girls. And then each color, they talk about a different thing that is one or the other color. And it's true. We talked about this before. We talked about this with Courage.
Yeah. Because he made Courage pink and then he couldn't sell his merchandise.
It just bothers me that this was so deeply ingrained in the culture, I guess, that it, again, was even in Oliver and Company. Mm-hmm. Emotionally speaking, there were so many moments that packed a punch in this film. And we'll get to the melancholia a little later. But I did want to point out the emotional complexity of the scene when poor little Oliver is rescued and brought back to Fagin's. And he's forced to explain that he liked living with Jenny.
We brought you home.
But Well, I have another home now. And someone who loves me.
I felt like this moment of guilt was so relatable because there's this defensiveness. Dodger's immediately like, well, if you want to leave, there's the door. You know, like this, you're ungrateful because we went to so much trouble to get you to come home.
Right.
And, you know, now you're acting like this.
They orchestrated a whole heist, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, they
whole
did.
big to do.
But Oliver never asked them to do that.
I mean, to be fair, if I was kidnapped, I would want my crew, my gang, to come rescue me, but it would have been nice if they had had a conversation about it and not just throwing him in the bag and taking him back. Even they had a whole trip back and never once did this conversation.
Yeah, they could have been like, hey, are you good?
They didn't talk about it till they got back to their dugout or whatever their hideout is.
Because they assumed, you know, this is where you're supposed to be. Like, we've accepted you now.
I mean, yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. There's just so much emotional complexity on both sides because you have Oliver, who's like a tiny kitten, and clearly he just wants to be where he's safe and like cared for and loved. And while he is cared for and loved in both places, it's hard for him to articulate. He didn't mean that he didn't love Dodger. It was just a different kind of love than Dodger could offer him.
Sure.
And it frustrated me a lot that Dodger's pride wouldn't allow him to admit that the environment that he'd been pulled from was no doubt better for Oliver than Fagin's house.
He's sensitive.
It's kind of giving like Charlie guilting Anne-Marie to stay with him and bet on the horses instead of living with the family that took her in.
That was way worse than this. All right. let's get real.
That was worse.
How dare you bring that up?
It's painful.
Try to forget about that moment.
It is worse. I agree, because Charlie's doing that selfishly. I'm sure there's an element of selfishness to what Dodger's doing, but it's mostly because he feels a loyalty to Oliver.
Well, I think it's insecurity, and it's like he likes him.
Yeah.
You know, he loves the kid now, right?
Yeah,
he's like,
you're part of this.
Fine. I mean, you don't want to be around me, then, you know, get out of here, whatever. Like, parents do that, you know?
I know.
Friends do that.
Yeah.
You ever had friends, or, you know, even when you break up with somebody and they're like, they get mad at you, like the response is anger because it's better than feeling that pain.
Correct.
And, you know, Lenny Bruce needs to cry too sometimes. Lenny Bruce hurts.
He does.
Oh, it hurts me.
He hurts.
Oh, you hurt me.
Yeah, there's all this humor and bravado and savoir-faire, but at the core of it, you know, Dodger is sensitive.
Sureness.
A polished sureness, and he's feeling rejected. It's him saying, you know, we're not good enough for you. What do you mean? And it's kind of playing at his own insecurity that's buried deep, deep under all of that stuff.
Of course, yeah. Poor Oliver. He's just a kid. He doesn't know how to explain it.
No. And that's the thing. That sweet baby kid, he just wanted to love his little girl and be loved in return. That's all he wanted.
I know.
And it didn't mean that he didn't love Dodger, you know?
This is true.
There's so many layers to this, but that flush of shame that Oliver feels when he's just trying to articulate that he liked being with Jenny.
I like you. I mean, I like every one of you, but there was a little girl. I just want to go back.
That put a whole lot of accountability and misplaced autonomy on the shoulders of a tiny baby cat. And I know how that feels. And it doesn't feel good. He doesn't have the emotional maturity to like navigate this at all.
Yeah.
But he's in the situation where it's making him feel guilty for just loving who he loves and like wanting to be with them.
Too common a story.
But I feel for Dodger too, at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to place blame here. I'm just exploring some of those like emotional threads and why it's so painful to watch. It's really hard for me. Like, it is painful because I get that guilt for sure.
Yeah, well, they also specialized in dialing in that animation to really, really show emotion. I mean, all these guys at the time were really good at just breaking your heart with sad characters.
Yeah. We talked about that with Pinocchio a little bit.
Yeah, they usually are small, meek, timid, scared characters anyway.
Right.
And then they just heap on.
Yeah. They
that,
pile
like,
on the emotional baggage.
Yeah, exactly. It is hard
for
to
sure.
To process.
And this is Disney in a nutshell, right? This is Bambi. This is Simba. Anytime where we see a vulnerable young character or older character.
I think it taught us how to feel very deeply at a very young age.
Because I couldn't have articulated why this made me feel so bad, but I would feel that same, like my face would get red and I would feel the same way that Oliver feels. Like,
I feel like if I was in that position, I wouldn't be able to talk.
I know.
I'd be like, I don't even know how to speak right now.
I don't. And not only that, but he's just been literally like shoved in a bag and taken from a place where he felt safe for once, the first time he's ever felt truly safe.
They had a whole journey from uptown down to the docks. I'm just saying, they could have talked about it.
I agree. They should have talked about it. And if you take one lesson from this, listener, It's that just talk about it. Like, try to diffuse. The pressure doesn't have to be so high all the time. I don't do well in those environments where there's high emotional pressure around every interaction.
You're telling me that the key to any personal relationship is communication?
Yes.
And understanding and empathy?
That's it.
You're right.
I feel like if Dodger had just taken one moment to consider Oliver, which I think he did, that's the whole thing. At the core of it, I think deep down he was, and that was making him even more insecure. And I wish instead of letting that make him insecure, he had let his tenderness for Oliver show through a little more.
He can't
Make it
show
a little
that. He's
easier on the kid.
He's the coolest quadruped in New York or whatever he said. He can't
Yes.
show compassion.
Nope, apparently not. Apparently it's not cool. Sincerity is scary, as they say.
They say caring is creepy. It's not.
I was waiting for that one.
It's not.
There were also dozens of pop culture references throughout the film.
Mm.
When Fagin has everyone curl up to read a story about a rabbit, he's named Bumper, which
Mm.
is clearly a play on Thumper.
You right.
And honestly, I feel like they could have just used Thumper.
Probably, yeah.
We just said it was Disney. There were some obvious Cinderella callbacks during Perfect Isn't Easy with the birds dressing her
Oh, yeah.
and everything. And I'm pretty sure that I also caught a glimpse at one point of a wishing star,
Really?
which is, Peter Pan, Pinocchio.
Yeah, that wouldn't be too far off.
Obviously, Francis is watching an adaptation of the Scottish play when he's at the television set. And I don't know if the rule applies when you're recording a podcast or if it's just a theater thing, but I'm not going to take any chances with the way my luck has been lately.
Not going to say the name of it?
Nope.
Gotcha.
If you know, you know. Disney's pretty well known for making Shakespearean references, though.
Simba is Hamlet. Finkel is Einhorn.
Beauty and the Beast comes to mind. Screw
Yeah.
your courage to the sticking place. And speaking of, when Dodger says, "Allow me to introduce your dinner,"
Mm.
I thought for a split second that was the same line from Beauty and the Beast. It's not,
It's
I don't think, not
close.
quite. Because I think Lumiere says, "The dining room proudly presents your dinner," or
Mhm.
something like that.
Yeah.
But even still,
When was Beauty and the Beast made?
this was first. Beauty and the Beast was 91,
Interesting.
or 92.
I thought so, because that was the Renaissance.
Yeah.
These are the Dark Ages, which I was thinking about it, and it feels like this is more the Middle Ages.
I know,
Like-
because we're easing into the Renaissance.
Yeah, like Black Cauldron,
Hmm.
that's like Dark Ages.
Yeah, that was early 80s.
This
This is late 80s.
is like Middle Ages. I would even say Little Mermaid, Middle Ages.
Mhm.
Then Renaissance.
The 90s, you think, begins the Renaissance. So
Sure.
it's really split into for the Christian Mott Disney timeline. It's the early 80s, the late 80s, and then the 90s.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
I got savoir-faire. What can I say? A polished sureness.
We also see Georgette, speaking of a polished sureness, I still can't say it.
Emphasis on the paw. Polished.
Georgette is getting her kicks from a classic 80s workout tape.
Nah, I did like that.
And we also see Winston enjoying some wrestling on TV on multiple occasions, which it comes back at the end with Fagin. And looking back now, I find the little details like that, like the guy with the boombox
Yep.
on the street. Those little details to me are so endearing because it feels like a time capsule.
It really does.
Because it was very contemporary for the 80s at the time. And to guide us into our next section while wrapping up an earlier point, because I'm a sucker for a segue, I'm finally ready to touch on Fagin's gambling con man ways, because this was one of the most mature elements of the film.
Let's touch on them.
It's immediately apparent, even to a young audience, that Fagin is hard on his luck, essentially squatting in a dockside shack and also sleeping in an airplane seat. He's also eating dog treats.
Yeah.
So he's not doing well.
That's the thing is they bring home hot dogs and they make him eat dog
And
treats.
they make him eat dog treats. And it's said pretty plainly by Fagin, which it's pretty dark for him to say this.
Dead men do not buy dog food.
Dead men do not buy dog food.
That's true.
They don't tell tales either.
That's a reference to a classic Fagin quote.
Oh, yeah?
Dead men never repent.
Dead men never repent. Fagin said that in the novel.
And so they changed it to dead men
Dead
do
men
not
don't
buy
buy
dog
dog-
food.
That's great. And then they went on to say dead men tell no tales.
Yes, they did eventually.
Fagin's poverty hangs over them like a black cloud every single day. It is reality that if they don't steal, they don't eat.
Hmm.
Even showing these terrible conditions and making Fagin out to be likable enough, or at least worthy of empathy, there's still at least a hint of the long-held whitewash narrative that the people in these positions somehow deserve to be there based on their sketchy actions. It's baked into the plot right there for young children to absorb.
Really is.
Like Fagin explains to Jenny when he's trying to justify taking Oliver for ransom.
But I mean, maybe he was up against the wall at the end of his rope.
Jenny reminds him it's still wrong.
It's still wrong.
And while I agree completely, something like the kidnapping of a cat or a child can never, ever, ever be justified, and it's still wrong 100% of the time, totally unacceptable.
Every time.
I still don't think, despite that, I don't think Fagin is as responsible for this mess as everyone would like him to be.
Mm-mm.
They kind of pit him and play him as this down on his luck con man, and he keeps... I don't know. He's trying to get out of the debt with Sykes. I've got 3 days. 4 sleeps, 3 sunrises, 9,
Three
6?
sunrises, 3 sunsets, 3 days. 9.
9. He's trying to
No, Fagin.
talk his way out of it, and they want him to be deserving somehow of this retribution. You know, he hasn't paid his debt. Of course, he's going to be in a bad spot because he hasn't paid his debt. I feel like the economic system that we live in is designed to keep the poor poor and the rich rich. And presumably even in borrowing money from the criminal Sykes and attempting to win big by gambling with it, Fagin is only using the very, very few resources that he has to stay afloat.
Yeah.
And he might be battling a very real gambling addiction with no safety net at all.
Well, we assume he's gambling, but we don't know for sure.
We talked about that before. We don't know for sure, but we assume that he's been gambling it away.
He could have needed it. It could have been for anything.
Yeah, we technically don't know why he took money from Sykes. It was discussed, or there was conversation around it having been a gambling thing earlier in the story process. But I think even if it was a gambling thing, I'm always and have always been inclined to think that it was more of I'm going to borrow this money, I'm going to double it, and then I'm going to be good.
It could have been a scheme.
I can pay him back and live. You know, I think it was like
but those things never really pan out anyway.
No, well, right.
That's that common trope, especially when it comes to crime dramas like this. It's like, I'm going to make it big and you're going to have a big payday and I'm going to have a payday, and then it never works out.
Yes.
And then you owe the money and it's
that
bad.
you took out. And I think it's that exact thing that you're describing. I think that's the situation that we see playing out here.
It probably
and I
was
do
that.
think that Fagin borrowed this money because he needed it. And he's also just trying to exist and live and survive and feed 6 dogs, whatever it is, 8 dogs. And we never really quite see a satisfactory resolution to this because even at the end of the film, Fagin's still kind of falling into those old ways.
Oh, that's true. There's a reference to that. You're right.
He's betting with Winston on the wrestling.
You're right.
There's also so much emphasis placed on the necessity of their less than honorable deeds like pickpocketing and their con act in general. Even in the lyrics to Streets of Gold, they sing, "The only rule is thou shalt not get caught. Get what you can, then get away."
Yeah.
And I think this is really the core of what they took from the Dickens novel. Look at these adorable animals being forced into sketchy situations because they don't have the support that they need. Dickens was saying the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
He wanted people to face the reality that our children are being exploited, recruited to crime, and abandoned in abject poverty.
Right.
And as in life, society tends to immediately villainize the most marginalized, the ones that are most in need of help. I saw a quote recently by Nelson Mandela.
No.
There can be no keener revelation of society's soul than the way it treats its children.
Oh, yeah. I have heard that before.
And I think that really would have resonated with Charles Dickens.
Yeah, I think
honestly.
he would have liked that. He'd have been like, damn, I should have thought of that.
Eat the rich, y'all. And listener, before you back away slowly, I promise that I also do not mean you or your doctor friend who makes like $200K.
Talking about the dragons of society that hoard all the wealth.
That is what I'm talking about, yes.
They guard all their gold and give nothing to no one.
And I just looked up a few statistics about that because I've seen a lot of things floating around on social media and stuff relating to the wealth inequality in America and globally, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
And in a film that so clearly highlights these class struggles, I thought it might be appropriate to just remind our listeners of some of these facts.
Hit us with these facts.
According to Bloomberg, the bottom 50% of Americans account for just 1.2% of the country's total wealth.
My God.
50% of Americans.
Almost just spat out my beer.
It's absurd. It's absurd, honestly.
Spit take.
And the top 1% controls about 35% of the country's total wealth.
Wow.
And according to Oxfam, this is something else that's just like kind of hard to wrap our heads around because people's brains are not good at grasping how much $1 billion is. A billionaire gained roughly $1.7 million for every $1 of new global wealth earned by a person in the bottom 90%.
Jeez.
1.7 million.
For every dollar.
For every dollar.
1.7 million.
It's unthinkable.
I still can't wrap my head around it.
And millions even difficult for most
people. It's like trying to comprehend how big our universe is,
Yeah,
or even just our solar system.
kind of. Yeah, like stars in the sky.
Yeah.
Sand on the beach.
Grains of sand.
The ultra rich have more money than could ever be spent or barely even conceived of, clearly, in a lifetime. And every day that gap increases. Billionaire fortunes have increased by $2.7 billion a day.
That hurts.
And we fight over scraps, not because we have to or because the wealth doesn't exist, but because they want us to.
Yeah.
Anyway, just food for thought. I just had to include it. When we're talking about class struggles, I can't not say something. You know how my soapboxes are. You know how often I text you paragraphs.
No, yeah, I'm here for it. We have a platform, so you know what?
Gonna say it.
Let's use it.
Just gonna say it.
Shout it from the soapbox.
Eat the rich,
Eat the rich.
not the middle class.
Yeah, it's wild stuff.
Peasants and kings. Listener, let us know if this has bothered you. Are we really supposed to assume that Fagin's debt disappears just because Sykes did?
Hey.
In real life, that would be highly, highly unlikely. And he would probably have other members of the mob coming for his head that same night, regardless of his ability to pay at that point, because Sykes is dead and he had something to do with it.
That's how you like end a season of like Breaking Bad. You kill the guy you owe money to and then you find out
Exactly.
that actually he owed money to somebody else.
It's all a chain.
He wasn't the boss. It's the next person.
Yeah, it's the next boss.
That's how every season of Ozark, I think, ended.
So I do think it was a little bit naive of Disney, but I think they did just wrap it up in the way that kids would understand, okay, this is over
Sure.
now because the bad guy's gone. But in real life, the bad guy's never actually gone.
That's true.
It really doesn't work that way.
We've seen how All Dogs ends.
Exactly. And unfortunately, it's even less cute when you remember that these are real societal issues that we really don't enjoy facing or considering unless we have to.
You don't pay the bank, it goes to a debt collector. You don't pay them, they break your kneecaps.
Break your kneecaps.
Maybe. I don't know how it works.
Thankfully, neither do I.
Thankfully.
But I did do a lot of research about it, which leads me to my next section, which is literally just called The Mob with 3 question marks. Something I think that we would do well to talk about here is the popularity and glorification of crime bosses and mafia in pop culture, especially what ended up bleeding into our childhood in the 80s and 90s.
Here we freaking go.
Depending on your own personal geography and background, you may be more familiar than the two of us with the history and significance of organized crime in America, especially.
Yeah.
But even as a 5-year-old, I knew enough to know that mobsters meant business, and they had almost unlimited resources when it came to getting what they wanted. I borrowed some of this research from a 2015 New Yorker article by Maria Konnikova about why we admire mobsters. I took that to also mean why we as a society decided to include them in everything, including kids' media throughout the late 20th century.
It honestly permeates so many things.
Maria said that, according to James Finnicknauer, an emeritus professor at Rutgers University and the author of Mafia and Organized Crime, A Beginner's Guide, the glamorization of the mob started with the Prohibition.
Hey, all right. I think I learned some of that from Peaky Blinders.
Hey, continuing to quote Maria. In the early years of the 20th century, mobsters were just small-time operators. Then came the Volstead Act, which outlawed alcohol. One of the side effects was to solidify organized crime and create a real international organization out of what was, in essence, small criminal groups. Because Prohibition was hugely unpopular, the men who stood up to it were heralded as heroes, not criminals. It was the start of their image as people who can thumb their noses at bad laws and at the establishment. Even when Prohibition was repealed and services of the bootleggers were no longer required, that initial positive image stuck.
We always worshipped outlaws. They thought, rob a bank.
Yeah.
You're stealing money from the man.
The man.
You're stealing money from this organized.
Fighting the man.
Because they saw, like bank owners and all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
They saw them as criminals.
And criminals, which, I mean,
Because
hey.
they're charging you interest on loans.
Right.
They're taxing you. All this bullshit. People saw them as the true criminals because America's supposed to be free, right?
And unfortunately, as I say, pretty often you either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain.
Yeah, you coined that phrase?
Yeah, that was me.
It's pretty good. Wow.
I do say it all the time. I don't know how I managed to work it in everything.
I think this is your second or third time on the podcast. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
But I do think it applies here, unfortunately, because as much as they wanted to fight the man originally, they kind of became, at times, a stronger, more powerful man. Books like Mario Puzo's The Godfather communicated the idea that mobsters were men who cared about the happiness of their communities and who lived by their own codes of honor and conduct, impervious to the political whims of the establishment. And of course, we do understand that to an extent, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that infatuation is continued over time, despite the means some of these crime families use to achieve their ends.
Right.
In a History.com article, they continue to explain this timeline. They say that the first wave of gangster movies mirrored the growing anger and frustration of many Americans at their worsening economic conditions. In movies like Little Caesar from 1931, The Public Enemy, also from 1931 with Jimmy Cagney, and Scarface from 1932.
Not to be confused with Pacino's Scarface from the 80s.
It didn't hit me that it was that old, to be honest with you, before I did this research.
I didn't realize it was either.
These main characters, all Italian Americans, some based on real-life mobsters such as Capone, suffered the consequences of their lawbreaking. But many audiences still identified with their willingness to go outside the bounds of the traditional system to make a living. Continuing that article, because this is what really gives us a solid timeline for mob references in the media, which is really what brought us here.
Yeah.
After 1942, gangsters largely disappeared from the screen. This was when Nazis and monsters took the place of mobsters as Hollywood's preferred villains. But this began to change after 1950, when a Senate committee set up to investigate organized crime began holding public hearings. Again, with the publicizing trials or publicizing the criminal acts. We talked about this with...
the execution sermons.
Yes, that's it. The execution sermons.
From Ghost Bride, yeah.
Thanks to the new medium of television, millions of Americans watched the testimony of real-life mobsters like Frank Costello, or they watched Costello's shaky hands, the only part of him shown by the camera. In the early 1960s, Joseph Valachi, a soldier in the Luciano family organization, took a starring role in later televised hearings. And it was Valachi who introduced the now famous mafia euphemism, La Cosa Nostra, and his testimony revealed the evolution of Italian-American organized crime in America, especially in New York. The Valachi Papers, a book by Peter Maas, came out in 1969, the same year as the novel that would do more than any other to establish the mythology of the mafia in popular culture, The Godfather.
Wow, there it is. So this timeline spans many, many decades.
So it had this boom in the 30s when it was connected to the Depression and Americans just being dissatisfied in general. And then it took on a whole second wind in the late 60s when people were able to actually see televised trials of these criminals.
I guess I didn't realize how far back it went.
So as a refresher, because it all ties together, the Godfather novel tells the story of the Sicilian immigrant Vito Corleone and the family and business he built in New York, including the struggles of his son Michael, who will succeed him as the new Don.
Yeah.
Paramount Pictures bought the film rights to the novel, and studio head Robert Evans turned to the young Italian-American director Francis Ford Coppola to direct. With Marlon Brando, who played Don Corleone, and Al Pacino, who played Michael, The Godfather gave a fuller and more authentic and more sympathetic glimpse into the Italian-American experience than had been seen on screen before. And even as it framed that glimpse through the lens of organized crime, it also painted an undeniably romantic portrait of the mafia as a man of contradiction, who was ruthless towards his enemy, but devoted to his family and friends above all else.
It carries through to The Sopranos.
Sure does.
That was most of my research was just The Sopranos.
Watching The Sopranos, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it
And
counts.
It's funny how much they reference The Godfather in the first 2 or 3 seasons.
Yeah.
Almost ironically, because
Yes.
it's almost like they go, yeah, of course. Yeah, The Godfather, sure.
Yeah. I'm actually going to tell you and the listener exactly why that is.
Heck yeah. Do it to us.
Unlike previous gangster films, The Godfather looked at the mafia from the inside out, instead of taking the perspective of law enforcement or of regular society. In this way, The Godfather reinvented the gangster movie, just as it would influence all those that came after it. Speaking of what you were just saying, it's a bit of that art imitating life, imitating art cycle when it comes to the mob too.
Yeah.
The New York Times even suggests that, and I'm quoting here, federal wiretaps and mob insiders suggest that many real-life wise guys turned to the 1972 Godfather film for inspiration, validation, and cues on how to speak, act, and dress.
That's really funny. And it also gave everybody who wasn't in that lifestyle this sense that they understood
Right.
how it worked.
You were on the inside because you saw the film, and the film was
Yeah.
from that perspective.
So everybody now thinks they know exactly how the mob works.
Right. Which is pretty dangerous, all things
It's
considered.
funny. And they do play that up in The Sopranos too.
Sure. A 2022 article by Michael Wilson states, at first, the film was viewed as a threat to that heritage, Before filming began in 1971, Anthony Colombo campaigned to purge the words Mafia and Cosa Nostra from the screenplay on behalf of the Italian-American Civil Rights League, which had been founded by his father, the organized crime figure Joseph A. Colombo Sr. So they didn't really want this to be a thing.
I mean, I get it.
And yeah, I totally understand why they wouldn't. They feared labor troubles and interference during filming, particularly in New York, and producers agreed with this. But soon after the film opened, it was embraced by many in the underworld that it depicted.
Thank God, because they could have all been murdered.
They could have all been really mad about it.
Yeah.
It's just, to me, yeah, that's kind of where the humor comes into this, because to me, it's so funny that they were like, we're going to make this movie about this really sensitive topic, and we're going to portray this group of people in a very specific and stereotypical way. That's a big commitment, like kind of scary. But the fact that, the novel was beloved, I think that helped.
Sure.
Quoting again, many wise guys rejoiced in viewing the original film multiple times. This is from Selwyn Robb, a veteran writer on organized crime, in his book, The Five Families, The Rise, Decline, and Resurgence of America's Most Powerful Mafia Empires in 2014. Returning to the New York Times article, federal and local investigators on surveillance duty saw and heard made men and wannabes imitating the mannerisms and language of the on-screen gangsters. They endlessly played the movie's captivating musical score as if it were their private national anthem at parties and weddings.
That's so funny.
The film validated their lifestyles and decisions to join the mob and accept its credo.
Wow.
And what do you know? According to producer Robert Evans, Francis Ford Coppola also made The Godfather's story a metaphor for capitalism.
Hey.
Full circle.
Man, that's good.
Pop culture, art imitates life. Life imitates art. And what were you said you had something about Charles Dickens?
I just was I was reading some stuff earlier.
Fagin?
So the type of man that Fagin was in Dickens' time, in the Victorian era, a man who would employ groups of street children to go pickpocket and then give him what they stole in exchange for housing and food and all this kind of stuff.
Not just a con artist, but a man who specifically employs children.
Specifically the children, yeah.
For these purposes.
They were called kidsmen.
Oh, ew.
Kids man.
I don't like that.
It's so creepy and icky and I hate it.
So Fagin is a dogsman?
Fagin would be a dogsman, yeah. But part of it that I thought was cool is that the novel was so popular and Fagin became such a well-known character that in the London underworld, they stopped referring to these men as kidsmen and started calling them Fagins.
Whoa.
Isn't that crazy?
That's wild. That's seriously art imitating life on another level. And again, just like with The Godfather, honestly, it's it's so meta because it's referencing itself.
And it's people who live in these worlds who fully embrace the fiction.
Exactly.
And they take it and they apply it to their life because they just like it. Yeah. So much. It's really odd.
They immerse themselves in it even more.
Yeah.
I like watching things that show me different perspectives, right? And show me perspectives other than mine. Sure. But I also totally understand the appeal of watching things from perspectives similar to mine.
Yeah.
And that's all these people are doing, in essence, is drawing from that fiction that's been written about them in their minds or their world.
Because it romanticizes what you do, something that you find probably pretty mundane. That you don't think about.
That's so true.
But then when you see it being sort of idolized or romanticized or heightened, you're like, you know what? Hey, it's pretty cool what I do, you know?
I am a badass.
Let's go get a calzone. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
I think you're exactly right.
I like that they embraced it and they liked it.
Yeah.
But.
And it's also the idea of it is so funny to me, just thinking about, a wedding of these mob families and they're just playing the soundtrack of The Godfather. It's just something about that's so ironic to me and not in a derogatory way at all. I think I would do the same thing if I were them, honestly.
And I like that it was a metaphor for capitalism because it's so ironic because,
because that's what they started off trying to fight. They didn't want this power and this system and then they became it.
Man.
This just all blew my mind as I was reading it. I was like, whoa.
That's wild.
Who knew we'd get here from Oliver and Company? That's what I love about That's Pretty Dark.
We always seem to find ourselves in these very dark corners of reality.
We sure do.
It's cool though.
And this intersection of organized crime and pop culture is responsible for most of the darkest moments in this film.
Yeah.
Tying it right back in. From Sykes' thinly veiled threats against Fagin, to their dockside dealings, to Jenny's kidnapping, and ultimately Sykes' timely end, we see Sykes regularly puffing a cigar into Fagin's face, espousing a cool countenance, never quite betraying the violence we can feel bubbling underneath.
Oh, it's just bubbling just beneath the surface.
He often reminds Fagin that when debts aren't paid,
People get hurt.
people like you get hurt.
Do you know what happens when I don't see my money, Fagin? People get hurt. People like you get hurt.
And it's captivating, right?
I mean, some of my favorite moments are those dark, conversations.
This combination of lethal yet cool and collected, vague and coded, but also crystal clear. It's another version of that savoir-faire that we were talking about.
Yeah, for sure.
And it doesn't surprise me at all that this archetype became a fixation for fictional purposes. But it surprises me a little more that it made its way all the way down into the depths of my psyche as a 5-year-old living in Alabama, many, many miles from most known organized crime epicenters.
Yeah.
And then it continued to pop up in media throughout our lives as we gained more and more distance from the so-called glory days of organized crime. I always think of that one Boy Meets World episode where Sean and Corey wait tables at a cafe, and Sean ends up doing errands for the quiet older men who are always posted up at the back table. They have him dropping off this package. Just drop off this package, kid. That's all you got to do. Come back here to us, and they pay him off. And Sean's doing all this stuff, and it's never, it's just vague. It's all just vague enough.
Yeah.
And as a kid, I'm like, well, what's in the package? Of course, totally naive, have no idea.
What's in the package?
What's in the box?
What's in the box?
But this is also clearly just a play on the mob. Like they made it into a sitcom
Right.
from the 90s.
Just working it in there.
Arguably one of the more whitewashed sitcoms from the 90s.
Yeah, that's true.
So this stuff has a pretty far reach.
It was done so often that we just understood it.
Exactly, yeah. It became ubiquitous.
Like even if it was confusing once or twice, seeing it over and over and over again and everything, you're able to connect all those dots and put together that puzzle and go, okay.
Yeah.
I understand organized crime now, and I'm 7.
Yeah, and I'm 7, yeah.
It's pretty cool.
I think you're right.
I could be a mobster.
I think pulling those little pieces of information, those depictions that we saw, just piecing them all together like a jigsaw puzzle, and then we got it. We understood.
Didn't those adults know that exposing children to this kind of darkness turns everybody into criminals? Cigar smoking, cocaine dealing, money gambling,
yeah, that describes
package
us.
dropping off and then box opening, clandestine meeting.
Package dropping off and in.
Don't they know that corrupts children?
I have had some clandestine meetings in my life, but
Have you?
I like to imagine that I have.
Might have been on the internet.
Hey.
2 a.m. chats with strangers on AOL.
That's the thing about illicit affairs. In the words of Taylor Swift. While we don't get to see the familial side of Sykes, and we're repeatedly met with this cold-blooded killer, his operation seems pretty advanced for the time, for sure. He's operating out of a warehouse down by the docks that we keep talking about, very reminiscent of All Dogs.
Yeah.
It's outfitted with CCTV, and we hear him say things on the phone.
Yeah.
Like, don't kill him yet.
You got to start with the knuckles.
You put on the cement shoes.
What's the last thing you do? You put on the cement shoes.
That's pretty dark.
Pretty intense stuff.
It's very intense. And as a kid, it was scary to me, but I don't think I absorbed all of that, thankfully, somehow. As many times as I watched it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I knew he was doing something bad, but the death didn't really get to me at the time.
And then telling Jenny that the dogs will eat her, basically, when he tells them to.
Oh, my God.
It's just,
It's pretty hard to watch. But we do get that classic villain petting the kitty cat in his lair trope.
Don Corleone petting his cat.
In All Dogs, we saw Scarface operating the gambling ring, but here, it seems at least somewhat more nefarious. The implication seems to be, just based on where he's located, that he's trafficking something.
Oh, I mean, docs.
But
yeah.
Who or what he's trafficking is not entirely clear. And we know that he is essentially a loan shark, which we talked about in part 1. He's essentially charging a ton of interest, unreasonably so,
right,
to people who can't pay him back.
Because I think it says Sykes Shipyard or something on his warehouse.
Shipyard.
So,
what are you shipping?
Anything he wants. Anything he can.
But the whole shipping facility, for the most part, was devoid of shipments.
Yeah. Well, I get the idea.
Is it money laundering?
I'm sure there's always money laundering involved in these sort of criminal organizations, just because they're getting all this money through nefarious
means,
ventures, these business ventures. They have no way to really show where the money's coming from. So they're just funneling it through these businesses. So there is always that element. But I kind of got the feeling if they didn't give him the money for the girl, he was going to use the girl to get the money he wanted
Anyway.
somehow, some way, anyway.
I get that feeling too. And that's even worse.
So they just don't get there. They don't go that far.
Thankfully, honestly. But they, like anybody watching it from, watching it as adults,
Yeah.
it's not a hard leap.
So this sweet little girl who just wants her parents around and finds a kitten to, have some
Company, good company.
some company, little friendship, gets caught up in this crazy organized crime situation.
Yep.
Where she might be trafficked.
All because the little kitten was living on the street,
Yeah.
which was sad enough. But we'll talk about that. There will be time to cry very soon. As a child, I was always upset by the brutality that begins in these scenes, and it really doesn't let up for the rest of the film.
It's true.
Fagin, who has taken out ransom on Oliver, hoping to have Jenny's wealthy parents pay up, runs into Jenny, who does not have the parental support, as we keep talking about, and is simply trying to reunite with her sweet baby kitty. There's also the moment when Roscoe and DeSoto fight with Dodger, and those whimpering sounds are
I know.
visceral. It hurts to watch even now. And
That fight-
I remember how it felt as a kid.
I feel like that was some classic Disney animation where they repurpose like the blocking, the motion of a scene like that. I feel like I could see the lion fight in Lion King,
Yes,
and I feel like I could see the beast fighting the wolves in the woods.
I bet they did.
It looked like a lot of the same,
Mechanics.
yeah, the same mechanics that they just took from Dodger fighting these Dobermans and just repurposed them later.
We do see, animation like that shared across Disney.
They do
the
that,
Disney
yeah.
franchise and other animated films, honestly.
It was just cool. I was like, whoa, that reminds me so much of those other movies.
Because as we know, a lot of the same people were working on a lot of the things that we talk about.
Mm-hmm.
Go to part 1 if you're interested in that.
Why fix it if it's not broke?
And of course, we also have that terrifying moment when Sykes rolls up in his car and kidnaps a tiny little girl, snatching her right off of her feet and tying her up in his warehouse.
Now don't cry, little girl. They only eat when I tell them to.
This is absolutely what I pictured happening to me during all of my stranger danger conversations. Every time. This is what I saw happening. I was like, if I don't do exactly what my parents say, and if I get into the car with the bad man, this is where I end up. I end up tied up in a warehouse somewhere.
Hey, I need help finding my kitten,
Mm-hmm.
little girl.
Yeah, we've we've talked about this on the show before, but that was always what my mom warned me about was even if they say they need help finding their puppy, even if they say that they have puppies in their van, you do not go with them to their van. And I'm just like, but puppies. Because again, I was an animal kid. You could get me to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, my parents recognized this, and God bless them. They wanted to take care of me.
That reminds me of New Girl when Jess is like trying to recount her life and she's like, nothing bad has ever happened to me. Life is good. You should trust people.
Mhm.
And there's this flashback to the guy pulling up in a white van and he goes, hey, little girl, you like candy? And she's like, yeah. And he's like, good, because we have too much or whatever. My grandma made too much.
Yeah.
The door
Yeah.
slides open and it's an old lady handing out homemade candy.
Yep.
He was just trying
He
to be
was-
nice.
Yeah. You got to trust people sometimes.
It's like, no, it isn't.
Nope.
It doesn't work like that.
It's never like that. Listener, it's never like that. Stranger danger.
Don't trust them. Don't trust us. Don't trust yourself. Don't trust anybody.
You can trust yourself sometimes.
Trust yourself. Actually, that's very, very important to learn.
That's kind of our
I'm
entire
trying-
mission here.
I'm trying to learn that. I should learn to trust myself.
And for a bit more levity, we also do get one of those, they're stacked up in a trench coat scenes, just like all dogs.
And your apologies.
Yes. And
All of your little apologies.
I'm just a bunch of apologies stacked up in a trench coat.
And that was an outtake
Hey.
from Ghost Bride that you can go listen to on our Patreon.
Yes. Yes, please.
$5.
Good job.
We won't charge any interest.
Nope. Not a dime. And then we've got the craziest car chase I've ever seen in my life.
Oh my God. This movie goes from relatively in the realm of possibility
Yes.
with some slight too attuned conversation between humans and animals
Mm-hmm.
to completely far out there in a way that's totally implausible.
One might say it goes off the rails.
Oh my God, I quit. I need another beer if we're going to talk like that. That's so funny.
This is totally absurd. You're right. It's beyond any kind of reality at this point.
I'm sure you're going to break it
Um,
down, but like, my God, when Sykes just hops onto the tracks and his car basically transforms into a brand new type of vehicle
Mhm.
entirely,
That's able to do this. Yes.
uses the subway electricity
right.
to then power his own vehicle.
As if it would not just grind to a terrible, terrible
I
halt.
know. It was just absurd.
Absurd.
The whole thing. Not the least of, not even the most absurd thing.
Not even the most absurd thing.
Anyway.
There's a moment when Dobermans say,
What's the occasion? Come to rescue your little friend.
Say goodbye, friends.
and I cannot help but think that this was a convoluted homage to one of Al Pacino's most famous lines from Scarface, "Say hello to my little friend."
Oh my God, you're right.
I think it has to be, right?
It's got to be.
It's not.
No, you're right.
It's not the same structure, obviously. But
No.
immediately that's what it calls to mind for me. So
That makes sense.
I just have to assume it was on purpose.
If it was modern Disney, they just would have said that line.
True, yeah. Nowadays they'd be paid for it.
That's true.
And though I was afraid of them, the Dobermans, I still always felt so bad for Roscoe and DeSoto
I know.
when they fell onto the tracks. And even worse, knowing Sykes didn't seem to care about them at all.
That actually did bother me.
It bothered me a lot.
I read a reminder online recently about like bulldogs and other quote unquote violent animals
Mhm.
that many people who live the status quo type lifestyles seem to think are just naturally violent and dangerous. Animals are raised a certain way, especially if they're house pets.
Mhm.
If an animal is violent, it's because they're raised that way.
Mhm.
Most of the time, 98.9% of the time.
For domesticated animals, yes.
For domesticated animals, they have to learn that aggressive behavior from something.
Because
And it's
think about
usually
it,
how they're treated.
animals that are domesticated, dogs, cats, etc., they were bred to be compatible with humans.
To be docile.
That's how
right.
they exist. That's how these
Yeah.
breeds exist. Any breed that is, traditionally a pet.
Right.
And you're going to say, yes, okay, well, some of these breeds were bred to fight. In some cases, yes, but at this point in the lineage, they're doing what they're told.
And they're like relearning how to be aggressive
Mhm.
and how to use that behavior to their benefit.
Mhm.
And then they're praised for then being aggressive.
Right.
I mean, these animals can be trained to do anything.
Mhm.
And so I think looking at these characters as dogs were not evil. They were not
Amen.
bad. They were not
Amen.
antagonists. They were just doing what Sykes
Told them to do.
trained them to do.
Correct.
And yeah, they're sentient characters in a Disney universe. So technically, like, I don't know, by some logic, they might have free will, but only so far as Fagin has free will.
Mhm.
No one makes him do anything.
Except
And he's
that-
still forced to do certain things
correct.
because he's put in
compelled by
a desperate situation.
right. He's compelled by violence, honestly, or the threat of violence, and so are Roscoe and DeSoto.
Yeah, if they don't do it, they are subjected to the same violence. They know
Mhm.
what their end is if they don't comply
They've
with Sykes' wishes.
you're nailing it.
And so, yeah, they're mean to the other dogs, but people who are raised and they're abused and they're treated poorly tend to grow up to be pretty brutal themselves
Hmm.
because that's all you know.
Yep. If they don't get therapy like they should,
Yes, you can get help.
which I would love to help Roscoe and DeSoto, and I wish that had been their fate. Because yeah, they were forced into service by higher powers,
Right.
and they were doing what they had to do to survive, just like Fagin and Dodger and Oliver.
They're victims just like everybody else.
Correct. To round it all out, last but definitely not least, and you guys know we're going to bring it up, we as a collective, young children, enjoying our Disney movie night, just sat and watched as a man died a fiery death on a bridge in a head-on collision.
He was demolished by that train.
That's pretty dark.
It's pretty dark. I mean, he had it coming.
He had it coming.
I think he
he
deserved
only
it.
had himself to blame.
He really did at the end of the day. You don't drive your car on the subway tracks and not,
And not expect
that.
Yeah.
But he was so far up his own ass, he believed that he could just drive on subway tracks
He could do whatever he wanted.
and the train would get out of the way.
That's kind of the epitome of the ego
Yeah.
of this man, this character, this type of character,
It's wild.
is that he's above it all. And clearly everybody's gonna squish
God.
the same way when they are met with a train.
Life sucks and then you squish.
And this isn't necessarily unique in terms of Disney depictions of violence, but this scene always felt especially brutal.
Yeah.
I will also tell you, this was actually the first Disney animated film to feature a modern handgun.
Really?
Older firearms could be seen in Pinocchio and The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad, but this is the first time that we see, like, a handgun as we would
Like
know
a
them.
Glock.
Right.
or whatever it is. I don't know guns.
I don't either. Don't want to.
I could say some more stuff about guns.
Oh, God. So much.
Trying not to.
Yep, actively trying not to.
Actively holding my tongue.
Yeah. To kind of wrap up this conversation about the mob and their role in society and how it bled into Oliver and Company, it's so interesting to me that as humanity, as a society, our frustration with the powers that be is ultimately also what fueled the fire to incite other, even stronger, powers that be. This is kind of how societies and dynasties shift and evolve in general. Whether you've forced the power to shift your way with money and connections and networking with wealthy families over centuries, or you've forced the power to shift your way with money and connections and networking with wealthy families over centuries. To be clear, this isn't a typo in my notes. I'm drawing a comparison between the mob and general governmental structures.
Hey, all right. I can dig it.
Either way, things tend to suck for those in opposition of said power or lacking comparable funds.
Too real, too real.
It's important to note that including elements from undesirable realities in pop culture is clearly not always intended to glorify that lifestyle, even though I did say glorify earlier. More often than not, it's done simply to expose these types of lifestyles. I think both in Dickens' case and Disney's here, and even in The Godfather. But as a society, we can be counted on to love our morbid fascinations.
Every time.
Can't we?
You want to start a podcast about it?
About it? I do. And speaking of morbid fascinations, my last section is called A Beauty in Which There Is No Melancholy? Question mark.
Damn. A beautiful question.
That's how I feel about life. That's inconceivable to me. And it was to Baudelaire as well. But aside from the reasons that we've now explored, from start to finish, this film also fits squarely into Disney's penchant for sadness and melancholy. The hardships, grief, and triumphs we watch so many of our favorite characters walk through are often what endears us to them. We know, we've said it before, I'm a sucker for the sad songs. I love the longing and the aching and the pining. And I think part of that has to do with the sheer amount of sad movies that I watched as a child, partially because I now find it comforting to be in some of those emotions. And I feel at home in that state of mind, but partially because it wakes up something inside of us and reminds us of our humanity and how we're all sharing this experience. And at the end of the day, even in feeling alone, you're never really alone.
You got that right.
Rewinding us to the opening scenes, immediately, while that gorgeous music is still playing Once Upon a Time in New York City, we're met with this pack of completely terrifying dogs. Terrifying. Like you described them before as soulless, I think.
One of us did.
I saw these dogs in my dreams. Like I saw them in my nightmares. They were there.
Yeah.
But I also saw those beautiful reflections in the puddles of New York City. Christian knows what the reflections do to me.
Oh man, I love animated rain. I think I said this during Pinocchio. I can't get enough of cartoon rain.
I love it. It's great in Pinocchio. And we talked a lot about the strategies that they used to animate the rain in Pinocchio.
Yeah.
It's just so good. It feels so good.
It feels way too good.
But what doesn't feel great is watching Oliver in that tiny box.
Yeah.
Being the last kitty, the last orange kitty
Sweet
left, and no one adopts him.
The last one. All of his brothers and sisters get taken.
A lot of people can't get through these opening scenes. You talked about it in part 1. It's hard to watch.
He's left alone.
I also have to talk about the way that Dodger's gang all consoled Fagin. We talked about Einstein earlier, reclining his chair for him. They place a blanket over him. They give him his dog treat. I always wanted a bunch of dogs to take care of me like that.
You could have that.
Well, I do now. My kitties pretty much do that almost.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
It also reminds me a lot of Charlie and Anne-Marie's car.
Oh, yeah.
In All Dogs, because they make all this rundown junk look so comfy.
They really do. I don't know how they do it. And it's always like settling in for sleep.
Yes.
It's always so cozy.
Cozy.
Because everything's dark, but like in Geppetto's cottage.
Yeah.
When he's trying to go to sleep with the clocks and everything.
Figaro snuggles up.
Anyway.
Yeah, it's nice.
I don't know why it's just so cozy.
It's always nice. They do it that way on purpose because they want us to feel these feelings. They want us to have that rush of serotonin when we're watching.
It's true. Comforted.
I mean, it can't have been actually that comfortable because I think Dodger was like sleeping in an inner tube or something.
No, yeah, in reality, it wouldn't have been very comfortable.
But when Oliver just cuddles up to him, like you can't help but love that. Like,
I know.
Don't get me started, I'll cry.
Gosh.
And on a similar and often sung on this podcast note in regards to the food in these movies, whatever Jenny made for Oliver looked so good. But she called it Cocoa Krispies, like Cocoa Krispies a la Jenny.
Whipped cream,
yeah.
And some other stuff that he does not need to be eating.
Yeah, cats can't eat chocolate.
No, they can't have chocolate.
But it looked really good, and it didn't hurt him what he did eat of it anyway. And doesn't Georgette come and eat some of it too?
No, she just stops him from eating.
She just, yeah.
They also shouldn't have dairy. Just no dairy at all.
Right,
Well,
it's
I
not a
guess
thing.
he's a kitten, but still cat's milk, not cow milk.
Yeah, it looked good, but now as an adult, I'm like, you can't feed that to the kitties. And also, why did you have to destroy the kitchen, Jenny? God.
The adult concerns we have.
Yep.
That was
Isn't
there for
it
the
sad,
adults.
guys? Because as a kid, I was like, yeah, that's perfect. I would do that for my
That's
kitty.
how you do it.
Make him something tasty.
That's right.
Ooh.
That's for the adults to cringe while watching this movie.
Mhm.
Going, oh God, the kitchen. Oh no.
We already touched on the emotional complexity of Oliver's return when Dodger rescues him. Dodger and the gang, I should say. But I think it's also worth mentioning here because in my notes, I just wrote, take that baby kitty back to his Jenny right now in all capital letters. It was painful. So we had that scene in our feels combined with the scene where Jenny comes home from school to find Oliver missing.
That really is the saddest thing.
I think I get my deep-seated fear of returning home to find my cats gone from this movie. I'm always afraid they'll somehow get out.
Mm-hmm.
They've never shown any interest in that. Knock on wood, there's not a way for them to get out. But I am always afraid that something will happen. Or, you know, maybe someone will come and take him and hold him for ransom. Who
I
knows?
have that intrusive thought that I'll come home, the door will be open.
Same.
And the cats
That's
will be
it.
gone?
It's an intrusive thought. I think it all
Yeah.
the time.
I have that.
And even if somebody did take him for ransom, it would not be the first time I spent an absurd amount of money on my cats.
Right.
I love them.
I mean, we'll pay it.
I love them so much. I'll pay it.
I mean, no, we won't. If you're listening,
Don't
we won't pay
take our
it.
kitties.
You'll pay when my cat attacks you.
Yeah, right? Neither of our cats would take too well to that.
Sphinx would be just slow blinking like, are you kidding me? You really think you're going to get away with this? My dad can beat up your dad.
Yep. I was about to say, he'd be like, my papa's coming.
I don't know if you've heard, he's a podcaster. So.
A real
For your
badass.
information, he's a little leaguer.
For your information, he's a little leaguer. God, I love that. Danny. Thora Birch is in The Walking Dead, by the way.
I'm pretty sure I knew
Listeners know this, probably. But oh my God, when I got to her season, it's been very nice to see her. But back to the sad stuff.
that. Back to the Morbs.
The Morps, yes.
Have you heard of that?
I have, yeah. Was it the 20s?
I don't know. I just saw it today. It meant temporary melancholy.
Yeah, the Morbs.
Got the Morbs.
I always got the Morbs.
You always have temporary melancholy?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
It's temporary because life is temporary, Christian.
You think you're going to be any better off after life?
God, I hope so.
All right. I just hope I haunt somewhere cool.
Right? Goodness knows we'll be haunting each other.
Yeah, right.
Be like, hurry up, come on.
You'll have to move here because I want to haunt this house.
Oh
so
yeah, of course. That makes sense.
Yeah.
This house was built in the 80s. It probably wouldn't be that fun to haunt.
Ask the woman who haunts it.
I'm saying to my ghosts. Yeah, I'm like, hey, right? It's not very fun. So
She must think it's pretty cool.
might as well.
She's still hanging around.
Finally, speaking of, expiring, we do have that Disney death where we're meant to assume that Oliver is gone.
Right, because he's tossed the freaking way out to the... He just disappears.
He does.
He throws him like a hot
He
potato.
is yeeted.
Yeet.
He is yeeted in a giant yeet. I don't like it at all. It hurts me. It hurts my chest. I don't like to think about it. I don't like to think about any animal, really, but especially a tiny baby defenseless kitten being brutalized like that.
If
It
you
really
think
bothers
about
me deeply.
He was thrown to safety.
And it still, well, that's true. That's how it ends up. And it still brought a tear to my eye, even watching it now.
A single man tear.
No, a woman tear.
Oh,
Thank you. I think even though Dodger's pride and stubbornness gets in the way pretty often in this movie, the friendship and earned respect between Oliver and the artful Dodger grows in a very satisfying way throughout the film, leading to those parting words where he says,
Hey, you're okay. For a cat.
I love a good reprise, man. So now, I will close this out with some comments on the reception of the film back in 1988 and how our affinity for the film carries on.
all right.
Oliver and Company ultimately made more money than any animated film in history to that point.
Wow.
The film made $53 million during its initial theatrical run and was among the 20 highest grossing movies in a powerhouse year that included Rain Man, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Coming to America, Big, and Die Hard.
That's a big year for movies.
hmm
Jeez.
It was at this point that Glenn Kane, the animator, realized, wow, this is actually happening.
Yeah, because it was pretty rare anyway for these movies to be well received.
Honestly, it was.
Any animated film
hmm
for a long time.
During the film's release, you might remember this, listener, if you were hanging out at the time, McDonald's sold Christmas musical ornaments containing the two main characters, Oliver and Dodger, which was the start of a multi-year agreement of joint promotions with licensed products.
Wow.
But this popularity dropped off pretty quickly as it was eclipsed by The Little Mermaid the next year. And unfortunately, the film fell off the collective radar for several years, which is what leads to it being called one of Disney's lost films.
Wow.
Luckily, it did have a theatrical re-release in 1996, and it was once again accompanied with a promotional campaign, but this time by Burger King.
Oh, wow.
And I think I remember those toys.
I don't know if I do.
Despite its financial success at the box office, the film was not released on home video until after its theatrical re-release, as was the case for most movies released during the so-called Dark Age. I think the re-release might have been why I personally saw it so many times, despite the fact that I didn't exist when it first premiered.
Well, yeah.
It's a little bit older than I am.
That makes sense. I guess that would be when we would have watched it a whole lot.
You were kind of talking about this earlier, how you don't believe that the Disney Dark Ages and the Disney Renaissance should be so segmented, and I don't entirely disagree. There are definitely some corners of the internet that believe that Oliver and Company should be credited as the true beginning of the Disney Renaissance.
Right.
Because it was Disney's biggest hit in over a decade. It outgrossed The Great Mouse Detective, The Black Cauldron, and The Fox and the Hound.
Mm.
And it brought back in that musical style, which is what had caused a lot of the earlier films to be so successful.
Right.
Just as a fun fact, I had never heard this before, but our French listeners can let us know if it's true. Apparently, the film was very popular in France when it was released. And to promote the film's French release, French singer Anne Mason made a song called Oliver, which became a hit in France.
Nice.
Oliver, Dodger, Tito, and Francis were also featured in a series of music videos starring Anne Mason that was released between 1989 and 1990.
Somebody had to animate all that.
Yes.
Have you seen it? Did you look it up?
I didn't look it up even. I should have. So, listener, Christian.
Yes, Kaylin.
In conclusion, why should I worry? Why should I care? Oh, because I've made the worst kind of enemies by talking about the mob and the ultra rich in one episode.
You and me both.
Yeah.
Oh, no. It's a good thing that none of them listen to our tiny little baby podcast.
Highly doubting it and hoping not. But there you have it. That's Oliver and Company.
Wow.
It's all for educational purposes, okay?
If you can embrace The Godfather,
Yeah.
you can embrace That's Pretty Dark Podcast.
I'm sure you probably expected me to hit Oliver Twist a little more and The Godfather a little less across this series. But I also think it was really fun adding the depth to the culture that culminated in the making of this film.
Right.
And it culminated in the darker elements behind the story itself, obviously.
Yeah, that came through way more than really the original text. Anyway.
Thank you for letting me share this film with you. It's one of my very favorites. I'm honestly just glad I got the opportunity to kind of make tribute to this film. And I know a lot of our listeners have been really excited about part one, and a lot of people are saying this is one of their favorites too, which is really fun for me to see because I never really got to bond with anybody over Oliver and Company. Though there will always be some aspects that age better than others, as with anything. This sparkly, shimmery 80s time capsule is one of the first movies that I want to show any of the children in my life. You know, mostly other people's with their parents' consent. But I'll make sure that they can always call Aunt Kaylin if they have any nightmares.
Hey, that's the way to be. See, I always want to do that for my nephew, but
Yeah,
I don't know
the whole consent
if
thing.
I can watch a lot of these movies.
And of course, yeah, that's your right as a parent, I guess, is to expose your kid to the movies that you like and think.
But a lot of the ones I'm like, has he seen this yet? I want to watch it with him. He's like, yeah, he watches that all the time.
Oh no!
I'm like, never mind.
I've been promised by my best friends that we're gonna have a movie night for Lion King with their little boy.
Oh, nice. That makes sense.
It's gonna be great. That's one of our movies. Me and his dad were together in the Lion King play in high school.
Nice, that's fun.
We'll be telling him those stories the rest of his life. He'll be like, "Oh my God, Aunt Kaylin, please shut up."
I've heard this at least 4 times.
We know you played Nala. Nobody cares. I'll be like, I know.
That was some good stuff. I didn't really know that we were going to learn that much about the mob.
I didn't either, to be honest with you.
But I'm
Listener,
down
I hope
for
that
it.
you were, I hope that you enjoyed it because it shocked me, honestly, the connections that there are in this film and so many others. And I think that this research is going to come in handy, as we continue down the road.
I think so.
Because there are plenty of opportunities
Because
that,
it's in so much stuff.
yeah, plenty of appearances, I should say, of similar themes.
And another example of how Prohibition and the Depression factors directly into all this entertainment that influenced how we were raised.
Yeah.
The media that we were raised on, I should
Yeah,
say.
it's such a simple concept that these things that happen to generations of people and leave this imprint, It's a simple concept that's going to come through in all of the fiction and media and echo and echo and echo on.
I love it.
But that's why we're here, and I love it too.
It keeps making sense.
And now the media that's echoing on is Oliver and Company.
Man, oh man.
So many people commenting, so many people saying that they love it, or the music is meaningful, or they can't help but cry. You're not alone.
Absolutely. Man, what a good time. That was fun.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for listening.
Yeah.
Thank you, listener, for listening. If you're interested in connecting with us, please go follow us on our socials.
Yeah, and subscribe to this podcast.
Yeah, click a follow.
Whatever you listen to
Wherever
us on.
your platform is, click a follow. That's super helpful because it helps us get into the ears of people that care about this stuff.
For sure.
And if you want, we also have a Patreon.
Yeah, lots of bonus content coming out. Patreon.com.
Patreon.com/TPD podcast.
That's right.
We both know what we're doing now.
Kind of, we're learning.
You can also email us.
You can.
I was going to let you say the email.
That's prettydarkpodcast@gmail.com.
Thanks so much for being here with us, traveling back in time.
Every time.
And thanks for letting us just indulge these weird rabbit trails, you know. We have those like structured, this is the production, this is how it actually happened, and then we get to go into the speculation a little bit, and I think that's really fun. So thank you, listener, for indulging
I think
us.
that's becoming my favorite part.
Kind of me too.
This is a weird thing that totally influenced all this that no one knew about.
Let us know how you feel about that, listener.
Yeah,
Shoot us an email,
you better like it.
or else
We know where you live.
people like you get hurt. We're not going to hurt you. We promise.
No, we're not gonna hurt you.
Just
Maybe
hurt
your heart.
feelings a little. Yeah.
Maybe your heart a little bit.
Bye, guys.
Bye. Thanks for listening to That's Pretty Dark. Written and produced by Christian Baxter Mott and Kaylin Andrews.
Our music is composed by Jonathan Simmons, and our art is provided by Paige Garland at Power Girl Illustration.
Join the collective nostalgia and follow us on Facebook and Instagram at That's Pretty Dark Podcast.
Share your experiences and let us know what shows, films, or villains still haunt you from childhood at that'sprettydarkpodcast@gmail.com. Remember, you're never really alone.
So, until next time, sweet dreams, everyone.
Come on, get out of here. Shoot, get out of here. Come on. Get your sausages.